Welcome back to Morning Joe. Joining us now, Executive Chairman of the online gaming company WinView, CNBC founder and contributor, and now a senior contributing columnist for Newsweek, Tom Rogers. Tom's here with his new piece for Newsweek entitled, "If Trump defies the courts, we're in a nightmare. We need to arm them to fight back." Tom, I'll just read, one conclusion that you make. For now, we must instead contemplate the unthinkable. What if President Donald Trump were to go beyond defying Congress and then also defy the courts? I sincerely hope this is not something we have to find out the answer to over the next 12 months. I'm going to make a prediction, Tom, that I think I think he will do that. And so what then?
Well, this is a very dark scenario if we face it, and the problem is there are no easy answers if we do. You have all these congressional subpoenas that are working their way through the courts, and obviously President Trump is defying them. Very good chance that a number of them are going to be upheld by the courts. And then what happens if he defies those court orders? And where this really gets tough is that if you look to enforcement there with a White House that says, hey, we have a president, no president subject to legal process while he's in the White House. You have a DOJ Office of Legal Counsel opinion that Special Counsel Mueller relied on that says you can't criminally indict a president. How do you go about enforcing a court order if a president defies it? And right now, we don't have a very clear process. The U.S. Marshal Service, which is supposed to enforce court orders, essentially the police force of the judiciary, unlike the Capitol Hill police that work for Congress, the U.S. Marshal Service is an arm of the Justice Department. And if Attorney General Barr said, hey, this is illegitimate, you can't force a president to cough up the documents or a secret server, whatever the court order might say should be seized, the Attorney General could tell the Marshal Service to stand down. And then what do? And we really don't have a process in this country. So the suggestion that I put forward is obviously one that's a reform that cannot be implemented until President Trump is out of office. But if we're going to face this scenario, we're learning that we got to plug some holes when he does leave office. And I suggest, look, in this kind of very dark scenario, the courts should be able to use the military to actually be able to enforce seizure of documents. Now, some would say that's ludicrous. That's a homeland scenario. That's something that is unconstitutional because the military is subject to the commander-in-chief. But we actually used to, after the Civil War, have the military responsible for implementing civil orders because the South was defying all kinds of things, and the military was there to help law enforcement enforce civil orders. We actually passed a law, because the South hated that, called the Posse Comitatus Act, that made it illegal for the military to impose civil orders. But in this narrow type of case, where you really don't have a way for the president to have law enforcement upheld against him, we actually may need to consider something like this to plug this kind of hole.
So what would that look like? Because right now, I think you're suggesting that the Supreme Court be given some type of enforcement arm that they control that could take action, but they would, whether it's the documents or even Donald Trump himself, if he refused to leave the White House, how would you, where would he be held? Where would they be held? I mean, what mechanisms, and maybe we can't talk about Donald Trump specifically right now, but in the future, how does this look as legislation?
Well, I think it's obviously something that has to be very limited. It obviously depends on believing that our military are real patriots, and you're not going to get into a situation where the military goes beyond the bounds of what the court direct them to do. It gets pretty scary if you contemplate a president not leaving office and a court ordering use of the military in that situation. I actually believe if we have a statute like this that would allow, under these extreme circumstances, for the military to be subject to the directive of a court, that just having the statute might in fact prevent the scenario from ever developing, and that in itself might be a great prophylactic. On the other hand, if we actually did face this very scary nightmare type issue, and the statute was challenged as unconstitutional, we'd probably be facing a scenario where the very authority of the court and our entire checks and balances system was in question, and those might just be the kind of facts where the court says we have to uphold a statute like this because we have no other recourse. But I think it's something we have to contemplate, because what I can see happening is, look, the impeachment process is going forward fast and not waiting for these court decisions on subpoenas. But come the middle of next year or the fall, we could have a decision that says, hey, cough up the contents of the secret server. Maybe there are conversations with Vladimir Putin there that are pretty damaging. And President Trump makes a decision, you know what? I'd rather take the political hit of defying a court order than allowing information like that to come out. Just the opposite of what Nixon ultimately decided to do in coughing up the Nixon tapes. And if we face that kind of scenario, currently, we don't have a process to deal with it. I think it's worth talking about it in hopes that we don't ever face that scenario next year. But in any event, I think one of the post-Trump reforms we need to consider is putting something like this in place.
All right, Tom, Rogers, thank you so much. The new piece is online for Newsweek right now. And